Okay, first I want to just say thank you all for being here and staying. Appreciate you being here. And of course, thank you for seeing it with people in the cinema because we haven't been able to do that for a while. So I'm grateful to actually have people see it in community with each other because we as filmmakers make films because we want to be in front of an audience. And so I'm really appreciative that you all are here and watching it. And it was really gratifying to hear you guys laugh in certain sections or giggle, and also, to kind of hear the sniffles at the appropriate points in the movie. I know I made you cry. I'm sorry. But cinema's cathartic. That's the whole point. So it's good that, after 25 years, it still has that power. That's, yeah, yay me, yay us, So it's like, that's cool. What I was talking about in the talk with the wonderful Madeline Hunt Ehrlich last night was that cinema, compensation was in fact a way to recuperate some of the silent cinema that we lost, because in beginnings of cinema, cinema was made with chemicals that unfortunately were some of the same chemicals that were used to make, flammable materials like gunpowder. And a lot of the early silent film has been lost to time because it's, it either disintegrated or it exploded. So a lot of the films, like one of the big film stars of the early cinema years, Lon Chaney, who was an actor who we know for a lot of important films, who was the son of deaf parents. Like 100 of, I think nearly 200 films that he was in have been lost because they, either combusted or they, disintegrated. So I think one of the things that happened with Black actors was that even more of their films were lost. And so as a film student at UCLA and being a part of the LA Rebellion filmmakers, it was important for me to kind of when we went to film school, we got bludgeoned with films like Birth of a Nation being, oh yeah, this is the greatest film of all time, and some of the professors never talked about the racism that was inherent in Birth of a Nation. They just talked about the technique and the film, but that film, just kind of reinscribed racism in ways that hurt us. And so my attempt to do a film like Compensation was attempt to kind of rescue Black film and Black film history and Black history in general by using those photographs and those images of African Americans and American history that we had lost because we weren't able to kind of see that kind of imagery and put it back into films. I had to use photographs because the films didn't exist anymore. So that was important for me to kind of include. And it took years to kind of find that because remember, back in the 90s, we didn't have online resources yet. You still had to actually physically go to the archives to get photographs. So I had to travel here to New York. I was living in Chicago at that time, so I had to travel to the Schomburg here in New York, or to Howard University, or to in DC, or to, okay, Howard, I see you in the house, or to the Library of Congress and National Archives, Chicago Historical Society, during the time when I wasn't teaching at Northwestern, during the summers, to get those photographs. And the archivists were great because it's not like there's a file that says Negro history 1900, 1905. You know, you had to go and look in different files. So it would be stuff like Visiting Nurse Association or Union or Dock Workers or Banana Company or some kind of like file you never would think of to actually get those materials. And that's the archivist would like, you know, I was, you know, I'm child of, you know, good parents. They, you know, taught me to be kind, be polite. And I would just like ask questions and they would like slide the files to me. And that was how I would like, you know, get the materials. Please and thank you, ma'am or miss or mister. And that's how I got those materials after years, just kind of going back all the time and just them giving me those photographs that would be in the most, to me, the most odd places that I would not have necessarily thought of on my own.
And I wanted to ask Mark.
Sorry, Dan.
Oh,
he wants to answer about Foster Floater Play.
No, I'm saying that you mentioned that.
Oh,
That was part of this question.
that was part of his question. Well, you answer it.
Or we can, we can get to it in a little bit too. Yeah. Mark, I was hoping to hear from you about sort of, I guess, the beginnings of writing the script and the origins of the idea to connect these disparate periods of history. But also, of course, I have to ask you and Zeinabu to tell us a little bit about this moment when the whole idea of the film changes radically, which is through this initial encounter with Michelle's acting.
Oh. Well, from the beginning, there was we had this idea. Well, Zeinabu had this idea of making a piece that would combine both period elements as well as contemporary elements. It was always going to be somewhat experimental piece. It was always going to be black and white, although the economics also made it particularly mandatory that it would be black and white. So when, as it was being written, the poet Paul Laurence Dunbar is an inspiration. He really likes his poetry. For those of you who don't know, Paul Laurence Dunbar is the first, you could say, African American writer who's able to make a living as a writer. But also, it's like one of the first well-known African Americans outside of pastors and ministers and or somebody like Booker T. Washington, somebody like that, who Booker T. kind of caters to white expectations, whereas this poet, he would travel around. He was young. He would recite poetry in churches. So he was well known. So the idea of combining this poem, which Zeinabu really liked, and which Nina Simone sings, Nina Simone sings a version of sings a cover of Compensation that you all need to really find and like, and we would have used it if we had the dough, but that didn't happen. Anyway, back to the story. It was always going to be like that. Period elements, contemporary elements. Also, a piece that would speak to history, to class, to diseases, and now history and class affect the way that diseases are not only treated, but how society views them in the context of race and class, who gets treated and who does not. So when we met, Zeinabu was on this grand panel in St. Paul, Minnesota, and she took me along. And while between reading grants and stuff like that, I had nothing to do. I would just go around, walking around St. Paul, taking the bus to see if I could see Prince. I'm a huge Prince fan. If I could see Prince in Minneapolis, I encountered their free local paper, those alternative weeklies, and there was this picture of this statuesque, beautiful black woman, and he says, I forgot the name of Michelle's company then, but she was being invited by the Northern Deaf Theater, and she was going to perform. So when I said, I told you, I said, we have to go. And we went, and we saw Michelle was performing one of her one-woman plays. And needless to say, she was mesmerizing. She was, of course, beautiful. She was smart. Really, she had the audience in the palm of her hand. And then when she was done, Zeinabu approached her. Zeinabu is not shy, right? I am shy, but she's not shy. She approached shyly. I'd never seen someone. She approached Michelle shyly. Kind of
no, I didn't. I stalked her.
And at the end, we waited for Michelle, and then said, "Oh, wonderful!" Blah blah blah. I said, "Would you like to be? Have you done a film before?" And I think Michelle said no. And then we said, "Would you like to be in a film? We are doing this film. Would you like to be in it?" And I think Michelle said yes that same night, if I remember. So from the moment she said she said yes, the film changed, because then it became a film. It became like a deaf film. Deaf with a big D. So therefore, you had to do research to do justice to Michelle and to the larger deaf community, and specifically to the black deaf community. So we didn't want to make. We saw. We had seen movies with deaf folks. For example, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. Those of you of a certain age may remember that film, and it's okay. So we saw lots of film, and of course the film that we saw, which is a decent film, but we didn't want to repeat the same mistakes. Those of you again of a certain age, children of a lesser God. There are three mistakes we did not want to make. One was to have a character. You should never do that with any character. To have a character in like floating. They have no relationships with anything else. So we didn't want to make have a deaf character with no deaf friends, no family, no deaf space. So that was one mistake we didn't want to make. The second one, we didn't want to cut off the instruments of the person's communications, which are the hands. American films, a lot of American films are in love with the close-up, right? And sometimes, if you get lucky, they'll do kind of like a half-medium shot, right? When you do that, you cut off Michelle's hands. You cut off Marley Matlin's hands, as it's done in Children of a Lesser God. And third, because you cut off Marley Matlin's hands, you had to have the other actor repeat everything that she says, which is not how human beings communicate, right? He's not gonna, if I say, "Hey, what's up?" He's gonna, "Yeah, blah, blah." He's not gonna repeat what I say. "Hey, what's up?" So it's a long way to say, the presence of Michelle in the film not only turned it around, but made us force us to, in a very good way, force us to learn new things and to discover a world that, frankly, a lot of us didn't know about. To discover this world that we as hearing folks, just like with black culture, LGBT, there are a lot of cultures that are oppressed in this world and in this society, and deaf culture is one of them. If you take one lesson, is to realize that deaf culture, deaf people, at least a lot of deaf people in the world of, say, of the disability community, not being able to hear is not seen as a disability. It's seen as just being different, with its culture, with its own language, with its own way, and we had to learn that. And Michelle helped us to get there. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, and then Michelle, I was curious to know about your impressions of the film. As it's changing as after it's initially proposed to you. So I was curious to know, sort of what your thoughts were at the time as it was taking shape in that way, and then maybe in the spirit of the film's conceit, we can connect that to sort of what your impressions are looking at the film today. And it's 25 years later.
Well, when we met 25 years ago, there was not a lot of black deaf representation in the mainstream theaters, except for what he just mentioned, Children of a Lesser God and other films like that. And those films come from a white deaf perspective. But when they approached me with their next film, Compensation, and they explained to me what their vision was of the film, I couldn't help but say yes, because why not? At that time, in the 1990s, you didn't see any black deaf stories out here. And so I said yes, absolutely. I thought it was so crucial that we have that exposure and included our black deaf history, our black deaf culture, our people, our language, our community, how we survived in that time period, comparing the 1900s to the contemporary times. And I thought that was just such a brilliant idea, and that's why I said yes. And I'm so glad to be part of that experience, because as an actor, they gave me a new perspective of how I was able to carry that character in two different time frames. Like, how would a deaf person in the 1900s, what was their vision like? How were they communicating? How were they signing compared to nowadays, a black deaf person in that perspective? And it was really two completely different roles that played together. And I also had to do my homework as an actress to talk to people, especially the black deaf elders who were alive at that time and are still living to this day. They were living in the 80s and the 90s. So I would ask them, what was it like living in the early 1900s? And they would go into detail and mention, like they said, the oppression, the racism. Back in the 1900s, they had deaf institutes. They had deaf schools, but they were segregated. They had the school for the white deaf children, and then they had the institutes for the black deaf children. It was for the colored deaf children, the Negroes. So they had to develop their own language. And nowadays, it's called BASL, and that stands for Black American Sign Language. But back then, we didn't have such a thing. We didn't have a name for it. We didn't know that it was a thing. So for them to develop their own language in that environment where they were able to communicate, those were the history pieces that I wanted to learn. Picking up some of their signs, and I would use that in this film. For example, when I used that, when he saw me dancing when he came home, and I used the shoulder sign like this, that is the Black American sign for help. Now, why was that the sign for help? Because back then, that's what it looked like physically. And so I was able to pick up some signs that they used back then and apply it in the contemporary. And now comparing those old times with the contemporary times, I was wondering how involved would I be in BASL these days if I had interacted more with the Black deaf community. You saw that I was at the Deaf Club here in this film, and my best friend, you saw how we would communicate during that time. And comparing the different times, because nowadays it's becoming more and more represented. There'll be different roles that pop up for deaf people of color than there used to be. And so now I see that as such a positive change over the last 25 years compared to now. Now people are more open to seeing deaf characters on the screen, especially Black deaf characters, but it's still not enough. There's not enough Black stories being told, still to this day compared to 25 years ago and now. So I really thank you both for starting that and opening that door for others, kind of starting that epidemic to tell our stories. So thank you.
Yeah. Just in the interest of time, maybe I'll ask Zeinabu one more thing, then we'll open it up to the audience if that's cool. So yeah, I mean, this at the festival this year, this is the first time that I've actually gotten to see compensation in a proper cinema, and the sound is extremely intricate and amazing. And so yeah, I mean, in the introduction, you touched a little bit on the kind of heartbreaking compression of the stereo mix into mono, but even before that, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about how you kind of conceptualized such an intricate sound design as this, where sounds are sometimes replacing images, sometimes extending images. It's a very symphonic kind of experience. So I was kind of hoping you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, for me with sound, I mean, when I work on other people's films, I usually do sound. That's my favorite. It's the cheapest part of filmmaking. So it's like, and I know there's filmmakers in the audience, so I know y'all know what I'm talking about. So, but like the music in a Zeinabu Irene Davis film always has to be like representative of African diaspora music. So we had the opportunity to work with the amazing ragtime composer who happened to live in Chicago, Reginald Robinson. And Reginald is in the film, within the film, the Foster photo play music. The guy who's the railroad porter, the one who's in white, that is actually Reginald. Yes, Reginald Robinson. So he's a MacArthur Genius Award winner from Chicago. So all the ragtime score is composed by him, and then Atiba Jolly, who is from Chicago, is like West African percussionist extraordinaire. So all of the Nigerian instruments, etc., were like from his collection. And I want to shout out my daughter, Mazi Cherry, who's in the back there, because she helped us with the captioning, and she and her good friend from high school, Sade, helped me like know what the instruments were, learn what the music. So shout out to Mazi Cherry in the back for helping with the captioning. She wasn't here 25 years ago, but she helped with the captioning so that mom could get it straight. So that's the rejuvenation process in works here, to make sure that the music was accessible. So they helped with getting that music correct. And we wanted to make sure that when we talked about the music, again, I talked about how we wanted the vibrations to be accessible. So like that was my heartbreak when the film came out, because when Michelle and other deaf and hard of hearing people would watch it, they wouldn't be able to know what the music was, because at the time the technology could only allow for 2 lines of captioning. So all they could know was what the dialogue, the spoken dialogue was, but they couldn't know what the sound effects were or what the music was. So now, thankfully, we can have a more inclusive captioning system, which is what Allison O'Daniel from Tuba Thieves, a hard of hearing filmmaker who worked tireless with me this summer, and we didn't sleep for a couple nights. Well, not a couple, but like a whole lot of nights. We're just working on the subtitling and thinking about where we're going to put that captioning and how we're going to use it, not overwhelm the film, but like put it in places so that it will work. That was like really important to like just make sure that we made it accessible for everybody so that it could work in there. So, and then, you know, Chicago's the home of house music. I don't care what y'all say over here on the East Coast. I know I'm from Philly, so I ain't trying to start no fights, okay? But, you know, Chicago was house music, so that was super important to have that house music in the contemporary section. So that's, you know, Joe Smooth was Yvonne Welbin, who's another filmmaker who was the associate producer on the film. And so her brother was, you know, one of the people who was the started house music back in the mid 80s, mid 80s, sorry, late 70s, early 80s. So we wanted to make sure we included house music as part of the soundtrack as well. So. Thank you for giving me a chance to make an acknowledgement here. Unfortunately, I didn't get to acknowledge my cinematographer. This is Pierre Armand Desir, our cinematographer. Unfortunately, oh yes, Pierre Armand Louverture, Toussaint Louverture, Desir, our cinematographer. Unfortunately, he passed away from complications to cancer and COVID in December 2023. So this is our homage to include him. Thankfully, we were able to have him do the audio commentary for the Blu-ray release, which will be on the Blu-ray release for the film, which will be released in August 2025. So he would be in heaven. Well, he is in heaven, I hope. I don't know. But anyway, he's part of the Haitian sensation. I met them. Yes. Well, you don't know. With Pierre, he might still be in purgatory, but I think he gonna get there eventually. But anyway, this is the Haitian sensation. Marc Chéry and Pierre Desir are the Haitian sensation. So yes, we have the veves that open and close the film, and I learned a lot about veves and Haitian Vodun through Marc and Pierre. So yes, there are adinkras and there are veves in the film. So I use those as the title cards, the symbols that are on the title cards. I also use some symbols from indigenous culture that are on there as well, on the title cards as well. So there were things that I would like embed within the title cards to acknowledge different heritages that I feel connected to. So they're in there, and they would relate to what I was trying to embed within the visual language of the film to impart meaning also. So yeah, you read it right. I think the main thing that Marc talked about was that we really had to make sure that we respected Michelle and the other deaf actors and their culture, that we had to make sure that we maintained medium close-ups for most of our shots. You know, we had to frame so that we did not lose Michelle's mode of communication, which is her hands. We like when we went in for close-ups, like we didn't just go in for the tight close-up, unnecessarily. You notice there's very few tight close-ups within the film. Michelle was extremely patient with us sometimes because honestly, sometimes, I just learned sign language. I was not that fluent. John was incredibly patient and learned as much sign language as he could. I threw a lot of stuff at John Earl Jelks. I asked him to do a whole lot of stuff for me. I asked him to gain weight. I asked him to learn how to play a mandolin. Yeah, he just I asked him to carry equipment for me. So he does a lot of stuff, and he, this one he really did enjoy working with Michelle, and he really did do a lot. They're incredible as acting team, and I can't wait to work with them again on my next film, which is called Stars of the Northern Sky. I can tell you about that later afterwards. But he, really did do an incredible job of just working with us, and sometimes the interpreters were good and sometimes they weren't so good. So, Michelle was again, very very patient with us, but it was really about framing and learning how to frame so that we got what we needed, and also we set ourselves up because we wanted it to look like a silent film. So it was tableau style. There's not we don't have a lot of pans or moving camera. We want it to look like tableau. That's what Pierre wanted. So when he was storyboarding, Pierre did the storyboard. We want it to look like tableau, so we have the actors move, but we don't necessarily have the camera move, so we were very, very, he was very disciplined. Pierre was very disciplined about what he wanted in the frame. And so we stuck to that, and we had students. We had professionals on the set, but I was teaching at Northwestern. We had students as part of the crew. That's the way we work as LA Rebellion filmmakers. We train as we work. So that was part of our ethos, is what we do. Yes.
And I also wanted to add that I think we had a couple of deaf people on set. Yes. And they were able to help with the technicalities to make sure that the signs were clear, that the shots were in frame, and that also helped a lot.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. This was before we had, video assist. We ain't had no video assist back then. That didn't exist.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, we have to leave it there, although I wish this could go on twice or three times as long. But I thank you all so much for this film and for being here, and thank all of you. Thank you.